I'm really super excited about this panel. You know, we may not look like it, but this is like a band of superheroes. And when you hear these guys' stories of what they've been through and what they're currently doing, I mean, we're not going to be able to get through all of it, but this is a crack team of folks who know not just where the bodies are buried, but how to fix the problems. So it's going to be a little bit of a focus on technology. It's going to be a little bit of a focus on systems biology and some information science. So get ready. I'm just going to go down the line, and then if there's any more time after that, we can have some questions. First, I'd like to introduce my longtime friend and partner since 2009, Wayne Miller, one of the real geniuses on integrative medicine in the United States of America. Wayne, go ahead, take it away.
So a couple things to know about me, one of which is I started my career at SmithKline French Laboratories. I'm a recovering pharmacologist. And I was hired at age 18 to do this brain research for them. And that couldn't happen now because I didn't have my undergraduate degree. But I mention it because it's relevant that my sort of indoctrination educationally and research-wise happened at an early age. The second thing I want you to know about me is that I left science and went into finance, pension finance, and was the author of the first pension fund fiduciary training program in the United States. It was endorsed by the largest association of financial officers in the US. I ended up consulting.
Excuse me, Wayne. Jeffrey and Jeremy, can I please ask you guys to take it outside? Go ahead, Wayne.
I ended up consulting on about $100 billion around the world, various foreign countries. My largest commercial clients were State Farm and Honda, the car company. Where at the time I would have told you we helped get Merrill Lynch fired from a $7 billion account. I would have told you that was my best work at the time. And then we turned the fiduciary lens to healthcare. And when you do that, first off, it's a cesspool. Secondly, you want to go to Cabela's or something and buy waiters. And so we began to look at how do you fix this monstrosity? Well, two other things I want to mention. Anthony Rogers was the assistant secretary of HHS, reported to Sebelius in 2010 December, about 7 months after Obamacare was passed. No one quite knew what it really meant yet. And we met with Anthony in his office, and we had a conversation about biophysics and biophysics-based therapies. I'm going to get into that in a second, but at the end of the meeting, we had two PhDs with us and a one-star Army general who ran 10 Army hospitals. And at the end of it, I said, God, Anthony, I think we could save you about $120 billion a year, 20% of the money you were spending. And Anthony put down his pen and said to me, and I quote, "We don't have a way to pay for things that work." Yeah. You ever been in a meeting?
Can you say that again, please?
We don't have a way to pay for things that work. It's one of those moments where you kind of want to bang your head going, he couldn't possibly have said that, because no one in Washington, D.C. would be that candid. So, but I walked away from that because I'm a finance guy. I walked away going, this is what they need. Until you can figure out how to pay for the medicine that works, everything is going to stay stuck. And I said to him, are you telling me that since Medicare was passed, that all the people that have been in this town since '65, no one thought to come up with a mechanism just in case you found something new that you could pay for the new thing and not pay for the old thing? He said, that's right. It was one of those moments where it's actually perfect because of all the problems that could be identified in this room, of the $5 trillion we spend on healthcare in the United States, not a nickel of it is spent on the basis of paying for something because you know it works.
Isn't that crazy?
We solved the problem. So it's a mathematical issue, really, but working backwards, you're like, okay, you kind of need data to know what works. Where are you going to get the data from? You can't go to a pain center, because I've been in the Cleveland Clinic's pain center, arguably the best in the world reputationally, where we treated patients with light therapy, sometimes called photobiomodulation. There's a few other names for it. We treated CRPS patients. Anyone in the audience know what CRPS is? It's about as bad a level of human suffering as you've ever seen in a patient. And it's a monumental loss of balance in the autonomic nervous system between parasympathetic and sympathetic control. If you ask a conventionally trained doctor, what drugs do you have for treating dysautonomia, they usually will say something like, how do you spell that? So I personally treated 8 chronic pain patients, spinal stimulators, morphine pumps, 20 to 30 meds a day. 7 of them had a spectacular response within 24 hours of the treatment. The treatment was with light on central acupuncture points on the head and the neck. And I thought, man, I was there with the CEO of the company that made the device. I thought, man, they're going to want to order 20 machines. They're going to want to invest in the company. We were set. This is 2002. They wouldn't even return my phone calls. So you get to see up front what the system does to people who participate in the system. And it was a moral injury that I could never let go. So, would the gentleman in back put the photo up on the screen, please? So, this is an 82-year-old man who was wheeled into an office before he was treated with light therapy. The picture on the left is what diabetic neuropathy looks like. There's no blood flow in his lower legs. And sure enough, he lived in a wheelchair. He had been diagnosed as a diabetic 12 years before, 9 different medications, and he was taking insulin in the morning and at night. He was treated with light therapy on acupuncture points behind the knee and around the ankle. I was a pharmacologist. I'm pretty sure I didn't know how to spell acupuncture at the time. The second shot is 24 hours later. You can see the diabetic neuropathy after a 35-minute treatment with light on acupuncture points was about 70% resolved. Given my training, it was clear, neuropathy, wrong diagnosis. The nerves weren't dead, they were turned off. Now, I knew a lot of people in neuroscience at the time. I could have gone to any of them and said, can you explain to me what a turned off nerve is? And no one would have answered yes. The third picture is 24 hours after the second picture, which of course 24 hours after the first picture. By the third shot, the diabetic neuropathy was 95% resolved. This guy walked home, he got onto the plane, the wheelchair was in luggage, and he never needed insulin again.
Wow.
So, problem number 1.
So how do you know that that's really true, Wayne?
It's my father.
Wow.
So that impressed me. and you can't look for how the hell do you explain this in the pharmacology literature. But in the biophysics literature, what you find out is the cells in the eyelid of Langerhans are structured like a liquid crystal display. And so it's sort of the perfect physiological structure to be able to transmit energy that would open up calcium channels that would release insulin. And so that turned me on to what the heck's an infrared photon, because it was part of the infrared spectrum that was used. Once you open that door, you find a couple of things that are pretty amazing. 1, the study of pharmacology is the study of the carrier of the signal. The carrier is not as important as the signal itself. So how do I know that? Think about people who eat blueberries. Blueberries are an antioxidant. What's an antioxidant? Something that supplies electron to fill the outer orbit of an atom, and so that's no longer reactive to the space around it. Thing to note, the periodic table of the elements. A guy won a Nobel Prize long time ago for constructing it, but it was constructed before all the holes were filled in. It is a schematic of the neutral state of charge of the minerals. But oxygen lives at +2, +1, -0, -1, and -2. It's the charged versions of the particles that are physiologically active and tell the system to do something.
Wait, that's really complicated, Wayne.
Sorry about that. Another problem, medical education doesn't go into biophysics. In fact, it doesn't go into physics much. So when you talk to conventionally trained people, they'll usually say something like, that's woo-woo nonsense, or that's some sort of charlatan stuff. I'm sorry, but we are constructed as electromagnetic beings. It is an electrochemical machine that literally uses electrical impulses to be able to communicate. And if you get down, the reason why you want to go down this road is because you will then be following how Mother Nature made us. It's going to give you insight that pharmacology never will. I'm going to stop there and let my friend Jose speak because he's really the brilliant one in the group.
Thank you, Wade. I just want to say a word about Jose. So, as I mentioned before, when you work with Bobby Kennedy, or even on Team Kennedy, you're consistently connected with people of the highest possible moral fiber, character, and genius. And actually it was Wayne who introduced me to Bobby in the first place. And then one of Wayne's colleagues, while we were trying to move some projects forward, and that's like another category, we may or may not get to it, introduced me to a gentleman and said that this is the former Chief Information Officer of HHS. And then I found out it was between 2019 and 2020. Jose knows a thing or two about what was happening during Operation Warp Speed and the specific data system that was set up to monitor it because he built it. Anyway, Jose has now started helping us figure out how to, I don't know. Jose, what are we going to do?
Yeah. So, well, first off, it's a pleasure to be here. I'll kind of lay out the system, and then I'll talk about what I think the gaps are. I think it's important to note that what brought me to healthcare is I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and my mom had a series of illnesses before I joined HHS, and she became septic. And I'll never forget sitting in the hospital in rural Pennsylvania and the doctor telling me, we're going to give her a cocktail of drugs, and they're going to kill her. And if she stays on those drugs for more than 2 days, maybe 3, she's going to die. But we don't know what she has, and we have to treat her with everything. And the data exchange that's built won't be back for maybe 2, maybe 3 days. And until we get the data results back from the test, we can't actually treat her. And I thought that's a pretty poor way to kind of
that's crazy.
Run an enterprise. So anyway, HHS offered me a job, and I had built the first functioning blockchain in the US public sector, and they offered me $25 million and said, can you build it here? And the first thing we did is we actually operationalized blockchain for the grant portfolio, which at the time was about $1 trillion. I was responsible for that. And then the contracting portfolio, which at the time was about $27 billion a year in contracts. And the idea is to distribute levels of control over data to the lowest level possible within the ecosystem so that decision-making could be made at the lowest level, in the case of a medical issue, at the level of the doctor and the patient. Fast forward, and they asked me to become the HHS CIO. I didn't apply. I think my hair would be a little bit darker if I never took the job. And then the pandemic outbreak happened. And so me and my colleagues built a system where we connected all 50 states, all 6 territories, 14,000 nursing homes, 8,000 hospitals, 25 federal agencies, 8,000 counties, over 2,000 different data sets in a period of 5 days, and did the largest implementation of supervised machine learning in the history of the world to speed up clinical trials and distribute therapeutics across the United States based on risk. We also started doing modeling to predict how hospital closures would impact and create food deserts in certain areas throughout the United States. Because if you think about rural towns, it's like McDonald's, a courthouse, and a hospital. Like those are like the 3 or 4 things that you always find in a rural town or a suburban town. One of the fascinating things that we learned from that is as we started to integrate the data assets, probably a mistake, but one of the concepts was let's make the data available to everybody and that we can run the largest open source project that I know of in the history of the United States and get feedback, but from the states, what data is accurate, what data is inaccurate. And what largely happened is that the data became very political. And so you can imagine being a 38-year-old CIO and watching certain people speak on TV who were political leaders, and knowing that the things they're saying aren't actually accurate based on the underlying data. Whether they were advised that by an advisor or whether they're stating that because it's their own belief, you don't know, but you built the data ecosystem. I think the lessons learned from that, and since then I've been evaluating quantum, cyber, and AI technologies, about 350 companies a year, just to kind of drive investment dollars towards them. I think the lessons learned from that are, number one, we need to be able to cryptograph any type of data, but health data in particular. We need to be able to cryptographically wrap a data asset or a data set. We need to be able to embed in that data asset or data set a record of its integrity. And we need to be able to control that data asset or that data set at a distance with an invisible ability to control it, regardless of what platform it goes on. We can't expect to modernize the entirety of the health ecosystem on one platform. It creates too much centralized control, and it allows for too much manipulation of data assets. But if we can cryptographically wrap a data asset, we can embed a record of integrity in the data asset itself, and then I, as the owner of that data asset, can exert control over it, over a distributed ecosystem.
Well, what kind of effect is that going to have on actual healthcare?
Well, what would happen is the patient would be able to share their data with multiple healthcare providers. The patient would be able to be compensated if they participate in any event, whether it's to create a new drug or to create a new course of care for some type of issue. They'd be able to be compensated for sharing their data and actually participating in the event itself. The other thing is that the way that they are treated and the impact of how that treatment is actually impacting them would be readily available to them in real time, and they'd be able to see how different courses of care are actually impacting other patients that have the same ailments but are maybe taking a different approach. So now you're not centralized. One of the things we learned during the pandemic response is, we couldn't get enough data to actually respond on behalf of the United States. A lot of the healthcare companies in the United States, data was their business. And if they gave away the data assets that they had aggregated, which really they didn't own, it was patient data, then they would give away their revenue stream. And we felt that was really unfair. And I think one of the really interesting things about the MAHA movement in particular is that if you can ensure that patients, doctors, people that create intellectual property can be compensated for the intellectual property or the data that they share or their level of engagement in the process itself, then you can start to drive and incentivize behaviors that are going to make them healthy. And you're not just incentivizing a large company to create a walled garden around data sets, which ultimately becomes a self-fulfilling ice cream cone, and it drives a set of behaviors where they're not incentivizing care to the patient. They're incentivizing data that supports whatever it is they're offering to the patient.
Yeah, we've got a lot of problems with that.
And the last comment that I'll make is and nobody's ever publicly admitted this, and I've said it publicly multiple times, so I don't mind saying it, but we experienced the largest nation-state cyber attack against a single endpoint in the world during the pandemic. Bloomberg did a documentary on it that's like 10, 12 minutes. So a reputable news organization, 18 billion cyber events against every endpoint in the US health sector for a 36-hour period of time a second. So 18 billion cyber events against every endpoint in the entire US health sector for 36 hours straight every single second from 2 million computers outside the United States. Part of that effort was for ransomware and malware attacks on the US population, right? Just basic healthcare fraud. The other part of it was to actually map out the system by which capital is distributed from a financial perspective throughout the health sector. The US health sector is about 34% of US GDP. If there's an economist in the room and you want to argue it's 28%, I'll give you the 6%, but it is 28 to 34% of US GDP. And so, we have to create post-quantum security as well as data ownership when we build these modern IT systems to protect our population. In my case, my kids. I think all my data is already probably stolen, but in our case, our kids. So I think we're working on, and I've been working with this group, I think the MAHA movement is a really interesting opportunity to build new models, to create new incentive structures with the right type of security that drives a patient to engage in a health system that's actually benefiting them versus benefiting a corporation that kind of maybe has an approach to care that doesn't benefit everybody. And I think that's a massive opportunity.
Jose, thank you so much for that. We're going to go over just a few minutes. I want to give Don and Keith a chance. It's just one of the regrettable facts of time that we can't get everybody's full story out. Don, can you please tell us a little bit about what you've been working on and how you've been helping the Secretary with his understanding of the information landscape in Washington, D.C. here?
Yeah, so I'm an information systems architect. I've spent my entire career supporting federal agency electronic records management. And records management is not very sexy, but it is the only true source of transparency and accountability that the government can provide. And
we're talking about like Tony Fauci's emails, for example, right?
I'm sorry, I can't
We're
hear.
talking about things like Tony Fauci's emails?
We are, we are certainly talking about Tony Fauci's emails. We are talking about, so in 2014, the Obama administration redefined the definition of a federal record to include all recorded information. So we're talking about everything, including emails and texts, documents, videos, photographs. The list goes on and on and on. So the law states, the Federal Records Act states that a piece of recorded information needs to be managed through its natural life cycle in compliance with National Archives and Records Administration requirements. That's what I specialized in. That is my entire career. And I have worked at all kinds of different federal agencies, all branches of the military, the Pentagon, DOJ, the White House, briefly, and in all that time, I have never seen one electronic record managed successfully in compliance with the Federal Records Act. I've worked with billions and billions of electronic records. I've never seen one managed in accordance with the Federal Records Act. And what brought me here and got me interested in this in the first place was I spent almost 2 years at the FDA, working for a large information technology vendor. And my job was to help them support their electronic records management. It wasn't long before I got there that I noticed that, like every place else I had been, the FDA had no authentic records management system. And what that meant was that they can't prove the authenticity or integrity of any of the information that they supply to FOIA requests and congressional investigations and the press They cannot prove that any of it is true. And it's been that way for almost 20 years now. And it is a crisis. As it happens, I also have a son on the autistic spectrum. And having worked at the FDA and knowing that they were able, and to be honest, they were deleting information, deleting records that they shouldn't, altering records that they shouldn't be able to alter, and they shouldn't be able to delete these records either. I knew that they were lying. And it became important to me to find out, to let the world know that this was the case. And I sort of blew the whistle on some of these other things. But
Yes, in fact, very much did he blow the whistle. And in particular, I wanted to say, unfortunately, Don, we don't have any more time, so I have to get to Keith's story. But one of the things that Don did very successfully was to help Secretary Kennedy to alert the members of HHS and FDA. You perhaps remember this glorious tweet where he said, "Save your records and pack your bags." Anybody remember that one?
So it's a long, deep, dark rabbit hole. But my hope is, and I've communicated with Secretary Kennedy. Leland and I have talked at length. But there is a solution, right? We can make all the HHS agencies compliant with the records management requirements and restore the trust that the American people have lost. There are technologies out there now, the blockchain that Juan was just talking about, open source AI. There are solutions to this problem. And hopefully, we will be able to make that happen. So,
Don, thank you so much. So forgive me, we're just going to go over a little bit more, but you have to hear Keith's story. Keith, would you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on and your journey from, I don't know, one place to another inside the system?
Well, I told Don to go really quickly because I got to catch a train, but he didn't. So I'm going to be real. I'm going to be quick. So I'm a private citizen, like most people. I'm vaccine injured. I come from a.
Can you guys hear him? Perhaps the guys in the back can turn him up just a little bit.
Right. Okay.
Can we get a little bit more volume on the mic
So
back there?
I'm vaccine injured. Pfizer, by the way. So my story is similar to Jose. I grew up in rural Virginia. My mother was diabetic. Foster kid was diabetic. I didn't know it. We spent most of the time in hospitals. And as a kid, I was just seeing the treatment or the information that was coming back, and she never got healthy. And so as I grew up, I went to the one place that I thought poverty was my issue. So I went to Wall Street to make money and to become educated. And then I became an entrepreneur in the technology business, bought a company that most of the nuclear submarines would run to not have any power problems. And then I heard wonderful President Trump in 2019, 2020 about the pandemic. And I thought I could help, never was exposed to healthcare. And I said, well, I can go fix this problem. And I started one of the largest virtual testing companies in the country for free to the public. To Jose's point, I believed in real-time diagnostics of information because of when I was a kid, it would take weeks, months to get back an answer to something that was never answered. And I figured that I could change that with technology. Started to do that. We were one of the first to see that there was false positives with PCR testing, and then the issues with vaccine. And so to Don's point, the technology, my job, I believe as a private citizen and meeting Leland and Mr. Kennedy to the movement, is the data exists. My job is to protect the individuals that don't have a say, to put the power of the information into your hands to where it's my data, our data, not yours, for us to be able to have the freedom of choice, for us to be able to have the treatments that work and lower the cost for the treatments that work that we choose, and not to be hidden behind either a database or data wall or alternative facts that doesn't work for your choice. So I know there's a lot of fear around AI and technology. I believe that there is a way for us to bring more transparent data where it lives in the power of the individual for you to have consent around how you choose to have health care around your own person. And in that is how we use our technology to solve problems on the behalf of individuals and organizations when they say they can't find the data and the information, because it does exist. And we're pretty good at going and getting it and putting it in the hands of decision makers so they can counter alternative facts, of which all of us can have and should have as we go in to seek care. We should be the biggest advocates for ourselves. We cannot do that if you don't have the most accurate data in real time to be able to advocate for yourself for the standard of care you want. That's it.
Wow, thanks. I'm just going to say one last thing before we switch to the next panel, which I'm very excited about. The stories that these gentlemen carry are very deep, and it's just not possible in half an hour to even scratch the surface. So if you caught a glimmer of something, please just approach them. Or approach me. This has been one of the best teams that I've ever been able to work with on everything associated with data and making things more accessible, understandable, and, well, you know, there's some data guys inside the government that aren't exactly telling the truth. And so we need some superpower folks to change that. Anyway, this is my team. Thanks, you guys.